I'm here today because I see enormous potential leverage in this group. I've spent 3 years I spent 10 years studying paleoclimate, and then the last 3 years studying global warming, looking at the science with great care. In the end, I became convinced and published papers on this. These are what we have right now. The first 4 have been accepted. The last one is close to being accepted. Published papers describing the following conclusion, that yes, global warming is real, and yes, it is caused by humans. And whereas the IPCC says most of the warming of the last 50 years is caused by humans, we reach a stronger conclusion. Essentially all of the warming of the past 250 years is caused by humans. I'll show you the data on that. It's a stronger conclusion. Our results will be quoted in the new IPCC report. But the reason I'm really here is because now, having reached this conclusion, our group, our Berkeley Earth group, which is now a nonprofit, a 501c3 nonprofit, one of our biggest missions is to convince the world that this is something that we need to act on and look in the same way that we looked at the science, look at an objectively what can be done, not an idealistic thing about what can be done, but objectively. For that reason, just Tuesday, I came back from 10 days in Beijing. And believe me, it's great to be here in the fresh air of San Francisco. And talking over there, because China is a big player in this. And whatever we do here has to be something that can be implemented in China too. Otherwise, the game is all lost. What I'd like to do, though, is to tell you one of the major things I am doing right now, that our group is doing right now, is talking to the opponents, talking to the skeptics, talking to the people who say, let's not do anything, and trying to convince them to change their minds. We approach not the grassroots skeptics, but primarily the high-level skeptics, the people in Congress, the senators, the leaders, the people who are funding climate skepticism. We're approaching them, and we've had a remarkable level of success. And what I wanted to do with you is show you how we approach this, what we do, what we don't do, and basically how to convert a skeptic. So I'm depending on, you may find this interesting enough that you may be able to use this approach yourself to bring aboard, onto the ship, bring them on board the people who are the most effective opponents of mitigating climate change. This is an op-ed you may have seen about a year ago, the conversion of a climate change skeptic in the New York Times. That's me. For 3 years, I doubted whether global warming was real, and certainly if it's not real, it's not caused by humans. And then after 3 years of very hard research with a great team that my daughter, Elizabeth, she's our partner in this, we put together this team, we raised funding, and we did the scientific research, and I was converted. So here's an example of a converted skeptic. And understanding why I was a skeptic, I'm going to show you that. And then what we did to answer that. And I think if you're going to convert skeptics, you can't just dismiss them as a bunch of nuts, as people who hate science. Yes, there are people like that. You can't convert them. They're the people I call the deniers. But there are skeptics that are legitimate. When I go to Washington and talk to senators who don't believe this, they raise questions like, well, how come the analysis groups only use 20% of the data? Didn't they adjust the data before they used it? Didn't they actually add in warming through their adjustments? The answer to this is yes and yes. What about the urban heat island effect? Isn't that a problem? The answer to that is yes. So these are issues. What about the station quality? 70% of the best stations in the United States are ranked so poor on the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration scale that they would have uncertainties of 2 to 5 degrees associated with them. Isn't that true? The answer is yes. Now, if you don't know the answers to these questions, you're not going to convince the sophisticated skeptic. And believe me, the people in Washington, the people who run the big companies, the people who run the oil companies, These people are sophisticated. And you can't just say, oh, but the evidence is so overwhelming. That doesn't do it. These are people who got to where they are because they've been skeptical about things that they heard. And they like to cut through it. And if they have these issues, you have to be able to answer them. So, I answer them for myself. Point number one, show respect. Yeah, okay, there are people who are deniers who pay no attention to the science. You can't win them over. I don't believe they're very influential. It's the people who are thoughtful skeptics that are the ones you have to win over. These are the people who influence others. Don't assume they're all anti-science people. These are sophisticated people, and you've got to understand their arguments. Of course, everybody has a duty to be properly skeptical, and scientists more than anybody. So skepticism is not a sign that someone is dismissive of science. Skepticism is a sign that you have a scientist you're talking to. So beware of that, and don't show respect. This is my spectrum of the people that I run into. They're the deniers. They're hopeless. They start with the assumption it's a great conspiracy, and everything here is simply designed to destroy the US economy. So forget them. But right below that are the skeptics. And the skeptics say, well, what about the data selection bias? And you have to have an answer. You can't just say, oh, but the evidence is overwhelming, because it turns out the evidence is not overwhelming, as I'll show you. The lukewarmists are people who say, well, I agree there's global warming, but it may not be as bad. The warmists are people like me now, who are concerned about warming and feel we have to do something with it. The exaggerators are people who say, well, I'm so concerned that a little bit of spin isn't going to hurt. Boy, does it hurt. It's that spin that's driving the skepticism. And I would, as a scientist, I feel I cannot put spin on anything. I know fellow scientists who do that. They say, well, Hurricane Sandy may be due to global warming, so let me just talk about it as if it really is. That's not a scientific result. That's a hypothesis that may be true. But if we use the standards of science, we cannot show that to the standards of science, Hurricane Sandy is due to global warming, even though it may be. So as a scientist, I have to be cautious. I'm going to show you plenty of evidence that global warming is real and caused by humans and a danger. But throwing in all the other evidence, that doesn't work with the skeptics. They know there are arguments against that. That's the exaggerators, and then there are alarmists. The trouble with the alarmists is that back at the Kyoto conference, they were saying, if we don't sign this, it's too late. And then they say at the Copenhagen conference, if we don't sign this, it's too late. And people get tired of that, and the US public has gotten tired of it. So that's the full spectrum. Okay, all issues must be addressed objectively, not emotionally, not frantically. Let me raise, these are the issues. These 4 issues are the ones that our scientific study addressed. The one on the upper left is a photograph of a temperature station that's ranked very poor by the NOAA standards. It happens to be in an asphalt parking lot. This is a bad situation. 70% of the stations in the US are ranked poor. And yet we derive a temperature from them? At Berkeley Earth, what we did, we spent several years doing this, is we got the list of these stations. They'd been compiled by Anthony Watts. And we did an analysis using the best statistics available to look at the stations that were good. It turns out if you use only the good and excellent stations, you get the same result that you get from using all of the stations, even if you use all the poor stations. We wrote a paper on this that's been published, well, almost published. How can that be? Well, we understand it now. I don't have time in my half hour to go into it in detail, but it turns out that although these stations are warm, the rate of change is not affected by their poor siting. And we could show that statistically. On the right is a plot, you can't see very well, but the lower blue curve is the global warming of the Earth, and the upper red curve is the global warming of Tokyo. This is what's called the global heat island effect. And there's the world, and there's Tokyo. The question is, so many of the stations are located in the cities, Could that not be biasing the data? This is the urban heat island effect. This is an important effect. You need to know the answer. The answer is that we did the analysis in two ways. One was using all the stations, but we don't weight the places that have most of the stations. You weight every kilometer, every square kilometer equally over the entire globe. Secondly, we did the analysis in which we eliminated all of the stations that were urban, threw them out of the data, extrapolated from the rural sites into the cities, even though that's going to be inaccurate, and then compared the answers, and they turn out to be essentially identical. The reason is that the urban areas are relatively small. Our paper on this has been published. It's really a clean answer to the urban heat island effect. Now, in the past, other people said, oh, I analyzed that, and okay, the details aren't in my paper, but believe me, I did a good job. Well, people don't trust people who say, believe me, I did a good job. We had to do it explicitly, and we have. And so the urban heat island effect, we can demonstrate, does not pollute the data enough to make a difference. Lower left. This is the number of stations being used. The blue curve is the number of stations being used by the other three groups. And you see it's dropped precipitously. We used all the data. Why did they do this? Well, we understand why in some detail. They did it not because there's a conspiracy. Why are they using only 20% of the data? Because the methods that they used work better when you have long strings of data. The trouble with long strings of data is that any station that's been around for 100 years was likely once in a rural and now in a city. And so there could be a bias from the urban heat island effect if you did that. And what we did is we just used 100% of the data. That required a new statistical approach developed by Robert Rohde, who's this genius I hired to do this project, to work on the math. And with that, we were able to use all of the data. We were able to get more precise results, still show global warming. I'll show you the results in a moment. Finally, on the right here, these are the corrections made by the other groups. And what you see on the right is that when they have a site and they realize it's been moved, they correct it. The net effect of these corrections is to add in additional warming. That's the net effect. So we did the analysis with no corrections. If a station moved, it's a new station. We just treat it as a different station. We could do this because we don't require long continuous stations. So we addressed each one of these. And finally, there's a problem that people say you require these enormous, elaborate computer programs to interpret how much is due to the Earth, how much is due to humans. And we didn't need that at all, it turns out. Here are our results. What you see here, the data themselves with their gray error bars, is this jagged up and down stuff. This is a smooth fit we fit it to, with some bumps in it, but each one of those bumps is due to a known volcanic eruption, measured from the dust that settled in Greenland and Antarctica. That goes back to 1753. And the volcanoes are pegged. We know they cool, but they only cool for a few years, and then their effect goes away. That really addresses one of the major issues. We go back 260 years, just about. 260 years. What about the smooth curve? Well, for the smooth curve, the first thing I tried was just an exponential, and then I tried a polynomial, and then I tried various other things. I tried the world population. They fit, but not very well. And after trying things, I got around to trying world carbon dioxide. And when I tried that fit, it was better than any other fit. This is a very simple correlation. Some people said it's too simple, but this is what we do in physics. This is how my graduate student discovered the universe is accelerating and got a Nobel Prize for it, by doing this kind of approach. This is the way to do it. And carbon dioxide fits better than anything else. This is compelling and simple evidence. I talked to one prominent billionaire skeptic about 6 months ago. And he said, well, how many parameters are there in that fit? And then I knew I had them. Because the answer was 1. And when I told him that, I knew I had won him over. At this point, he was no longer denying global warming. He was no longer denying that global warming was due to humans. His next question was, but maybe the global warming is good for us. But I consider that a victory when you get someone to that level. It may be good for us, I don't know, but it's a change, and changes are disruptive, and disruptions are bad. And I said to him, and I'm not talking like a scientist at this point, what I can show you is that global warming is real and it's caused by humans. Now, what happens, we're all in this together, we don't know whether it's good or bad. And I can't claim as a scientist to be an expert on that aspect of it, but Elizabeth and I were there, and at this point, we were smiling at each other. This was converting a very influential skeptic. And this has happened time and time again. Has global warming stopped? You'll hear this all the time. Oh, no global warming of the past 13 years. Well, it turns out, here's the data again. And look at this. Look not at the fit, but look at the data, up and down, bumpity bump, bump, bump. Did it stop here? Well, yeah, sort of. There's something else going on. We believe this is a North Atlantic oscillation in the currents. What about this? Did it stop there? The fit doesn't stop, but that's a smooth fit. Did the global warming actually stop? Well, there was a volcanic eruption while following it. What about, there are other places where it seems to stop. What about here? Did it stop? Look at that. That's not gone up for 13 years. You have to recognize there are bumps and grinds and fits and starts in the data. Those have to be included in. 13 years is not long enough. I hope it has stopped. That would be great. Maybe negative feedback, cloud cover is kicking in. But when you recognize that over the past 50 years there have been similar so-called stoppages, when you're going up steps, you get to a platform, you shouldn't assume you're at the top of the building. Maybe the steps keep on going. So this little thing of where it stops, let's all hope it has. But you cannot conclude scientifically that it has, because we have seen this phenomena so many times, the fact that it's going up in bumps, because of El Nino, because of the North Atlantic oscillation, because of other variables. I ask you all to forswear the cherry picking. You don't convince skeptics by saying, well, this may be due to global warming. You see this all the time in the newspapers. You even see it in articles in scientific publications. They say this may be due to global warming. Boy, the skeptics really hate that. You throw 100 coins on the floor and say, look, this one's heads, and here's another one that's heads, and there's another one that's heads, and here's another one that's heads. These must all be double-headed coins. That's, you know, that kind of penny picking. Hey, look, I found 49 heads. You know what the odds of that are? They're 1/2 to the 49th power. No, they're not. You're cherry picking. You're penny picking. So beware of attributing everything that's bad to global warming and ignoring everything that's good. Because when I was a boy in the 1950s, this was done for nuclear atmospheric testing. Everything that was bad was attributed to nuclear atmospheric testing, unless it was attributed to the communists. Look, the evidence is very powerful that global warming is real and that it's caused by humans. You don't have to frighten people. You get into the exaggerator or alarmist role when you start saying, well, just walk outside and you can feel it. You cannot. I'll show you that. What about the hurricane increase? Here's a number showing the increase in hurricanes in recent years. So I looked at this rather carefully, and you see this increase in hurricanes. And here in the 1930s, there was a very low number. Well, it's been published that in the 1930s, there were no hurricanes in the deep Atlantic. And there are lots of hurricanes there now. The number of hurricanes on the coast is virtually unchanged. Why are there suddenly hurricanes in the deep Atlantic? The answer is we have satellites. We have automated buoys. Back in the 1930s, ships didn't go there. It was too dangerous. We didn't record the hurricane. Is this an observational bias? Pick an unbiased subsample. Pick the coast of the United States where every hurricane is reported. And you can plot it up yourself. The data are available. The blacks are all the hurricanes. And are they going up? No, actually they're going down. Is this incompatible with global warming? No. Theory doesn't predict that hurricanes will increase. Some theories predict that. And they claim victory when they say the hurricanes are going up, but the main reason hurricanes are going up is because we have better observations now. Global warming could, in some theories, reduce the number of hurricanes because it reduces the discrepancy between the equator and the pole, and that discrepancy is a big effect. So when you start arguing hurricanes, you're not going to win over the thoughtful skeptics, and they are the ones you want to win over. What about the more intense hurricanes? So those are the ones in red. Hurricane Katrina was actually a blue hurricane, It was only a Category 3 when it hit New Orleans. And of course, Hurricane Sandy isn't even on this because it was below hurricane strength when it hit. So be wary. I know you want to give people things that are meaningful to them, like polar bears are dying, because that wrenches their hearts. But it's not going to win over a sophisticated skeptic who knows that they are not. Be objective. It's the way to win over the key people. Number of tornadoes has been going down. Yes, there are more deaths when they happen to hit a city, but the number of intense tornadoes has actually been going down. Number of wildfires has a peculiar shape that's worthy of study, but this is US government. They publish this every year. This isn't me, some nut, putting this together. Al Gore, in Inconvenient Truth, says the number of wildfires is going up, but he doesn't use the US. He uses Mexico, all of North America. If you look around, you will find some place where they're going up. And he doesn't use all wildfires. He uses destructive wildfires. So there's more destruction done now than there was 50 years ago. Well, as you all know, we build closer to the wilderness than we used to. So you have to be cautious. Now, some people say, but then you don't persuade the public. The problem is, people say this issue is so important that we cannot abide by the standards of science. And that's exactly backwards. It's so important that we have to keep our scientific objectivity. The global warming is real, and it's caused by humans. Is this a danger? How much has it gone up? Almost 1 degree Celsius. Well, hey, that doesn't seem like so much. Look, it isn't so much. It's not because it's gone up 1 degree Celsius that we're in a panic. It's because we understand why it's going up, and we can project that it's going to go up another degree and another degree and another degree as long as we keep on dumping carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So the worry is not because we are now suffering from global warming. Any sophisticated skeptic would say, I'm not suffering. The worry is for the future. Make sure you check your facts. Be objective, be scientific. The evidence is very strong and, in my mind, convincing. But in An Inconvenient Truth, I never, you could, I mean, the movie An Inconvenient Truth was, you can look this up on the web. They wanted to distribute it to every schoolhouse in the UK. And a parent brought a lawsuit. And the judge, a high-level judge, had people come in and argue it. And in the end, he said, yes, they can distribute it to every school in the UK, every school. But they have to list, along with that, 9 facts that got wrong. And you can look these up online. This is a UK high-level court. The melting of Greenland in the near future? No, it's not, no science for that. That's a speculation. It might happen. But the science seems to indicate we would have to continue our rate of global warming for 1,000 years before it would happen. The atolls are being inundated, just not true. Ocean conveyor belt is shut down. Well, that was Wally Broker had that idea, and then a year later, after doing detailed calculations, it turned out not to happen. I'll go through all this. Let's see. Melting of Kilimanjaro, Lake Chad drying up, Katrina damage, polar bears dying. None of this was based on science. It was all based on someone sees something bad and thinks it must be due to global warming, makes a plausible argument, and then presses, Gore is not a scientist. So one can't really blame him for this. But for people who want to persuade a skeptic, don't bring in facts that are not based on science. There are plenty of facts based on science. Show it again. This is a curve that the skeptics I show it to, when they see how we did it, they find it very, you can find this on our webpage, berkeleyearth.org. Okay, now this one, okay. The reason, Mr. Skeptic, you should believe this is that 5,000 scientists signed a petition. Now, that's not going to convince the thoughtful skeptics. Maybe convince you. My problem is I go to these people who signed the petition. I went to a Nobel laureate at Berkeley, a physics professor, Nobel laureate, who signed the petition. And he said, Rich, did you sign the petition? I said, no. Why not? Well, I'm worried about the effect of the data selection bias that comes about because one group uses 7% of the data, the other uses only 20%. The data that they're ignoring may be a problem. He said, oh, I didn't hear about that. So you signed the petition, but you didn't know about it? What about the data station quality? Do you know about that? No, tell me about that. Why did he sign the petition? He signed the petition because he was told this was an anti-science movement. And it was like the theory of evolution. You got to sign your name on it, become part of supporting science. But he didn't know that there were legitimate issues to be raised. So these petitions are just not worth much. The Nobel laureate who signed it, with his credentials on that petition, didn't even know there was an issue. Again, I show this. Okay. Recognize that the IPCC report does not even claim to be a scientific report. It's a bunch of scientists doing very good work, politicians, other people getting together, but it is not a scientific report. It was never meant to be. It's supposed to be an evaluation among policy people, and they made some terrible mistakes. Here's one of them. They said in their last report, 2007, that the Himalayas could lose their ice by 2035. Now, at the time, a referee objected, said there is no scientific evidence for this. So you know what the author of that section of the report did? He overruled the referee. This is a refereed report? Boy, if I could overrule the referee, why did he overrule it? He said afterwards, that was Moriah Lau, the chapter on this. He said that he knew there was no solid data to support the report's claim that they could dry up by 2035. Quote, we thought that if we can highlight it, it will impact policymakers and politicians and encourage them to take some concrete action, even though it wasn't based on science and is certainly not true. There is a consensus among glaciologists that this will not happen, but it was in the IPCC report. But that's okay. If you think of the IPCC report as not a scientific report, you just have to be very careful. And don't start citing the IPCC report in front of the skeptic. It won't work because the skeptic will know this story. And you have to know it too. What about loss of ice at the poles? That's often cited. Well, the skeptic will know that Roald Amundsen sailed through the Northwest Passages in 1906 when it opened up in a sailboat, a wooden sailboat. So maybe these things are cyclic. Do we know this is the lowest ice that's ever been there? No, we don't know that. And the skeptic will know we don't know that. And if you cite that, I mean, the evidence is strong that global warming is real and caused by humans. But be cautious about what you include. And my time is getting low, so I'm going to have to hurry. Antarctica losing ice. I'll quote here that's highlighted. The most recent IPCC report predicted the Antarctic ice would increase in mass. It turns out the measurements showed it was going down. So it was opposite to the predictions. It's still cited by people saying the loss of ice in Antarctica supports global warming. In fact, what happened is when it decreased, that surprised everybody, so they changed the theory. Now the theory post-sticks it. Okay, global warming is real, caused by humans. Not all global warming is obvious. Look at this plot. This is a plot from our data in the United States. Every blue circle shows a location where the temperature over the last 100 years has gone down. The red ones are where it's gone up. There are twice as many red ones as blue ones. The circles take up more area. They look more dramatic. If you average these together, you find the United States is warmed. But I sometimes think that skeptics all come from cities where it's cooled. You can't go out and see global warming. It's only 1 degree on average. And your local variation is 5 or 10 degrees over 100 years. You can't see this except by averaging hundreds or thousands of stations. So I recommend, you can't tell the skeptic, didn't you go out today? Didn't you sense the global warming? They'll know you're wrong. Global warming is real and caused by humans. And finally, don't defend ClimateGate. I hate it when people defend ClimateGate. Let me show you what they did in ClimateGate. It wasn't, I mean, some people say it was someone hacked into it. No, evidence is it was leaked by a member of the team who was very upset with what his team members were doing. This is the plot that they published on the cover of the Meteorological Society. And now let me show you what ClimateGate contained, not only the emails, but the data. And let me show you what the real data were. You see the difference? Does this show global warming? Yes, it does. It shows it's going up. Look at the trend from 1600 till now. It's going up. It doesn't show it as dramatically. Whoops. But don't defend, and they, you know, they explain in their emails how they are making sure that people who disagree with them don't get published by using the peer review system. This was deeply embarrassing to the point where I think what they did, they should be disbarred. If we had a license for scientists, they should be disbarred. I am deeply embarrassed by what they did. And the people who authored those papers, I will not read their papers anymore because scientists don't do this. It wasn't that they used Mike's trick to hide the data. It's they used Mike's trick to hide the data. The hide is what they did that was wrong. Scientists shows all the data against what I'm claiming and then argues that despite that it's true. So don't defend ClimateGate. Global warming is real and caused by humans. So here's my list. How to convert a skeptic, show respect, address issues objectively, be a scientist yourself. Don't do cherry picking. Check your facts. Don't just take a list from Al Gore. Don't cite authority in petitions. The IPCC is not a scientific group, so be very cautious with what you do there. The way they get their statistics, I learned this recently. If you want to say, well, we have this with a 95% probability, when I do that, it's through detailed statistical calculation. When they do it, it's by vote. How confident are we? And then they put that statistical number on it. It's not a scientific group. Warming is not obvious. You can't just go outside and sense it. And don't defend ClimateGate. But come back to the data. The global warming for the last 250 years is real. It's caused by humans with a one-parameter fit. That is compelling. And that's dangerous because we know the carbon dioxide is going to be going up, mostly due to the developing world. And what we have to do, in my mind, is if we set an example, it has to be an example that the developing world can afford to follow. So really expensive solutions are good only to the extent that they subsidize technologies that will someday become cheap, but it has to be soon. So this is our approach. It works, but the number one thing right from the beginning is show respect and be knowledgeable about what it is that the skeptics object to. Most of them are familiar with most of the arguments I just put forth. They're not familiar with the answers. And these are people who, for the most part, do change their minds when they learn new things. It's the sophisticated leaders that I want to approach, and I hope all of you can approach too. So, thank you very much.